Hey, welcome back. Get comfortable because tonight we are going somewhere warm and strange and full of pine trees. We're going back to Gravity Falls. And not just for a casual visit, we're going deep. We're counting mysteries. 150 of them, the little ones, the huge ones. The ones hiding behind other ones that you might not have noticed even after your fifth rewatch. So settle in, pull something soft around you, and let's begin. Section 1. The opening theme is a whole mystery by itself. Before a single word of dialogue is spoken in any episode of Gravity Falls, before Dipper finds the journal, before Stan pulls his first scam, before any of it, the mystery has already started, and most people have no idea. The opening theme for Gravity Falls is one of the most deceptively layered pieces of television produced for a general audience in the modern era. On the surface, it looks like what you'd expect from a fun summer show. Two kids exploring a weird forest town, a bumbling great uncle running a tourist trap, colorful little vignettes of monsters and mysteries set to a catchy piece of music composed by Brad Breek. It looks light. It feels light. And it is absolutely packed with secrets that the show won't fully explain for years. Let's start with the most famous one. At the very end of the opening theme, for roughly 1 second, a series of letters flashes across the screen. They appear so quickly that on normal viewing, most people either blink past them or assume they're decoration, like a little visual flourish. But those letters are a cipher. And if you know what to do with them, they spell out a message. During the first season of the show, that message decoded through a Caesar cipher, the simple kind where you shift each letter back 3 positions in the alphabet. It reads, "Stan is not what he seems." That's the opening message, the first thing the show tells the people paying close enough attention. And it's a spoiler for the end of Season 2. Think about what that means. Alex Hirsch encoded the show's central reveal into the opening credits of the very first episode, over a year before it was going to pay off. He trusted that someone would find it and that they'd be patient enough to wait. He was right on both counts. But the ciphertext is just the front door. The back door is the audio. If you reverse the audio of the Gravity Falls opening theme, you hear a whispered message. During the first stretch of Season 1, that message says, 3 letters back. That is Hirsch literally hiding the instructions for decoding the cipher inside the thing you need the cipher to decode. He hid the answer inside the question. He folded the solution into the puzzle itself, and tens of thousands of viewers found it, and tens of millions never did. And it keeps going because the show changes the rules. Around episode 7 of the first season, the end credits cryptogram switches from a Caesar cipher to an @bash cipher, where you mirror the entire alphabet so that A becomes Z, B becomes Y, and so on, moving inward. The reversed whisper in the theme changes too, now saying, "Switch A with Z." Hirsch updated the tutorial alongside the test. He was teaching his audience cryptography in real time, rewarding obsessive attention without ever explicitly acknowledging that the lesson was happening. Then around episode 14, the cipher shifts again to what's called an A1Z26 system, where each letter of the alphabet is simply replaced with its corresponding number. The whisper updates to say, 26 letters. And then when Season 2 begins, the show upgrades to a Visionaire cipher, which is a much more sophisticated system requiring a rotating keyword to decode. The whisper says Key Visionaire. That's the whole system, spelled out if you know where to look. Those end credits messages weren't throwaway jokes or random filler. Some of them were genuine foreshadowing for events that were months away. One of them, appearing before the Society of the Blind Eye episode even aired, read, "Search for the Blind Eye." It was an invitation from the show itself to investigate. Another message decoded to Gideon Rises before the Season 1 finale. Another hinted at time travel being real before Blendan Blandon's storyline expanded in Season 2. Hirsch used the cryptogram system as a running second narrative, a shadow story told exclusively to the people willing to do the work. Now look at the images themselves within the theme. You'll notice that in the brief flicker of Polaroid photos that falls through the screen near the beginning, you can spot multiple figures who are villains, monsters, or significant characters. Gnomes, the Hand Witch, the Summerween Trickster, Little Gideon, and a small, partially obscured face that belongs to Alex Hirsch himself. This isn't vanity, it's foreshadowing. Every Polaroid photo in that sequence represents something that Dipper and Mabel will actually encounter during the summer. The show was pre-mapping the season into its own opening, before the audience had any context to understand what they were looking at. Then there's the Bill Cipher wheel. Near the end of the opening, for a fraction of a second, a circular diagram appears covered in symbols. A pine tree, a shooting star, a six-fingered hand, a question mark, a llama, an ice bag, a pair of spectacles, a pentagram, a crescent moon, a heart, and at the center of it all, a yellow triangle with a single eye. Most first-time viewers register it as interesting visual texture and move on, but each of those symbols represents a specific character in the show's mythology. The pine tree is Dipper, the shooting star is Mabel, the six-fingered hand is Ford Pines, the llama is Pacifica, the question mark is Seuss, the spectacles are McGucket, the ice bag is Stan, and so on around the wheel. That wheel is the show's finale encoded in the credits from day one. In the series conclusion, it's revealed that when all the people represented by those symbols stand together and form a circle, they create a force powerful enough to destroy Bill Cipher. The prophecy was sitting in the opening theme for 2 full years before it became relevant. Hirsch had the ending planned from the beginning, and he drew a diagram of it and put it in a place where millions of people would see it without understanding what they were seeing. The opening even includes a tiny figure darting through the pine trees that many fans have debated over the years, something that looks almost like Bigfoot seen briefly just before the theme transitions to the main title card. It's barely there, just a dark shape moving in the tree line, gone before you can focus on it. Whether it's a deliberate hint at something specific or simply atmospheric dressing, it captures the show's entire philosophy in a single half-second. There is always something in the trees. There is always something watching, and you will almost certainly miss it the first time. Mystery number 1 through roughly 15 are all nested inside those 90 seconds of opening theme music. The show doesn't wait for you to settle in. It starts the puzzle before you even get comfortable. Before we go any further, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. It's one of my favorite things about these videos, getting to see everyone spread out across time zones, watching from living rooms and bedrooms and late-night kitchen tables. Let me know you're here, and if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button while you're down there. It's free, it takes 2 seconds, and it helps these videos keep coming. Section 2. The 3 Journals and the Secret History of Ford's Research. Every great mystery has an artifact at its center. For Dipper Pines, that artifact is a water-damaged, 6-fingered hand-covered journal that he finds stuffed inside a hollow tree in the forest in episode 1. From that moment, the journal functions as both plot engine and emotional anchor. It's the thing that validates Dipper's instinct that something genuinely strange is happening in Gravity Falls. It's also the tip of an enormous iceberg, because there are 3 of them, and the story of why there are 3 of them, who wrote them, and what happened to the people involved is one of the show's most carefully constructed long games. Journal 3 is the one Dipper finds. It covers the supernatural creatures and phenomena of Gravity Falls with meticulous detail, accompanied by handwritten notes and sketches that become increasingly frantic and paranoid as the journal progresses. The author, we don't know who that is yet, seems to have started the project with genuine scientific enthusiasm, and somewhere along the way became genuinely terrified. The phrase, "do not trust the one-eyed demon," appears at a certain point, and then the final words written in the journal, in shaking handwriting, are, "I've made a terrible mistake." That's how Journal 3 ends, with regret and fear from someone who clearly understood too late what they'd gotten themselves into. Journal 2 ends up in the possession of Lil Gideon, who uses it to summon Bill Cipher during the first season. This journal covers more advanced topics: interdimensional physics, the nature of the anomalies surrounding Gravity Falls, and instructions for more complex summoning and dimensional manipulation. Gideon found it somewhere, but how exactly he obtained it and where it was before that is never fully explained in the show. It just exists in his possession, as though it was waiting for someone unscrupulous enough to actually use it. Journal 1 was in the possession of Stan Pines the whole time, hidden in the secret room beneath the Mystery Shack, the room he accesses through the vending machine in the very first episode. Most first-time viewers who clock that scene don't immediately connect it to the journal mythology. Stan has Journal 1. Stan has had it for 30 years, and Stan knows far, far more about the supernatural history of Gravity Falls than he has ever let on. The author of all three journals is Stanford Pines, the great uncle who disappeared into an interdimensional portal 30 years before the events of the show. He wrote the journals during a years-long research project meant to document and understand the concentrated paranormal activity surrounding the town. He began as a scientist. He wanted to understand why Gravity Falls was strange, what was causing the anomalies, what the underlying physics were. His research was meticulous, organized, genuinely brilliant. And then he made contact with something that started feeding him the answers. The progression across the three journals mirrors Ford's psychological deterioration. Journal 1 is calm and systematic. Journal 2 is more urgent and exploratory, pushing into stranger territory. Journal 3 is the one written by someone who knows they are in danger. The three books together form a portrait of a man being slowly manipulated without fully understanding that he is being manipulated. And then came the part where he finally figured it out and realized the machine he had spent years building was not going to open a window onto another dimension where infinite knowledge lived. It was going to be a door that let something very specific into the physical world. Ford's discovery of the first journal, or rather, the creation of the first journal, is rooted in his research into Gravity Falls as an anomalous hotspot. The town sits at what Ford eventually determines to be a natural point of weirdness magnetism, a convergence of supernatural forces so concentrated that paranormal entities are drawn to it from across dimensions. He began documenting the creatures living in and around the town, cataloging their behaviors and habitats with the same precision he brought to every academic endeavor. He was, by all accounts, one of the most brilliant researchers of his generation. He graduated 3 years ahead of schedule from his doctoral program, was nationally ranked in his field, and had already won significant academic awards before he was 30. But brilliance and wisdom are not the same thing. And Ford's particular kind of intelligence, the kind that needs to know everything and trusts its own conclusions above all else, made him extraordinarily vulnerable to a manipulator who could tell him exactly what he most wanted to hear. The journals themselves are physical artifacts that matter in ways beyond their content. Journal 3's cover, a dark green book with a hand showing 6 fingers embossed on it, became one of the most iconic images in Gravity Falls fandom almost immediately. Fans started noticing that Ford's 6-fingered hands appeared in background art early in the series, long before his identity was revealed. His silhouette is visible in various scenes. The hand embossed on the journal cover keeps reappearing in decoration, graffiti, and hidden art throughout the show's run. The author was always there, always implied, present in the edges of scenes that hadn't revealed him yet. There are also details in the physical appearance of the journals that reward close examination. Journal 3's pages become increasingly sparse as it progresses, the handwriting changing character depending on Ford's emotional state during the entry. Some entries are meticulous and clinical. Others are scrawled quickly, as if the author was afraid of being interrupted. Some pages have evidence of previous entries that have been scratched out or torn. The journal that Dipper finds is not a complete document. It's a damaged, edited, partly destroyed record of incomplete research conducted by someone who was running out of time. A replica version of Journal 3 was published as a physical book in 2016 and became a New York Times #1 bestseller, staying on that list for 47 weeks. That's not a children's book phenomenon, that's a cultural artifact. People wanted to hold the thing, they wanted to carry it around. They wanted it to be real in a way that very few fictional objects inspire in their audience. Mystery number 16 through roughly 30 live in the space between the journal's pages. What entries did Ford scratch out, and why? What parts of the town's history did he decide were too dangerous to write down, even in a private document? What happened in the weeks between the last calm entry and the final line he managed to write before the portal took him? The journals give us outlines. The spaces between the lines are where the real questions live. Section 3. Stan's double life. The 30-year sacrifice nobody knew about Stanley Pines is the most important character in Gravity Falls. I'd argue about this with anyone. Not because he's the most dramatic, or the most powerful, or the most morally complex, though the last one is legitimately up for debate, but because the entire plot of the show exists because of a decision he made 30 years before Dipper and Mabel arrived in Oregon. A decision made out of guilt and love and stubbornness, sustained for 3 decades by a man who had every reason to give up and never did. Here's what happened. Stan and Ford were twins, born in Glass Shard Beach, New Jersey. In the mid-20th century, the sons of a pawnshop owner named Philbrick and a woman who told stories. They were close in the way that twins sometimes are, genuinely, deeply close, united by a shared dream of adventure, of building a boat called the Stan-O-War and sailing it around the world looking for treasure. Ford was the brilliant one, the academic, the kid who built things and understood things and was going to go on to do something extraordinary. Stan was the scrapper, the joker, the one who protected his brother from bullies, because Ford was getting picked on for having 6 fingers on each hand. Then Stan, trying to help, accidentally destroyed Ford's perpetual motion machine the night before it was supposed to win him entry into his dream university. Ford's chance evaporated. Their father, furious and humiliated, disowned Stan and threw him out of the house. The brothers parted on terrible terms. The years that followed were not kind to Stanley Pines. He attempted a series of get-rich schemes. He got banned from over 20 states and imprisoned in at least 3 countries. He hit what can only be described as rock bottom, living in a cheap motel room and in debt to people who were not the forgiving type. And then a postcard arrived. From Ford. The first contact in over a decade asking Stan to come to Gravity Falls. When Stan arrived, Ford was not the brilliant, confident brother he remembered. Ford was disheveled and paranoid, convinced that the machine he'd built, a portal meant to open a window into another dimension, was too dangerous to operate. He wanted Stan to take one of his journals far away and never come back. He didn't want reconciliation. He wanted Stan gone again. Stanley, hurt and angry, fought back. During the argument, Stan accidentally activated the portal, and Ford fell in. The portal closed. And Stan was standing alone in his brother's underground laboratory with no way to contact anyone, no way to explain what had happened, and no way to get Ford back without the other 2 journals he didn't have. He faked Stanford Pine's death with a car crash that he staged under his own name. He assumed his brother's identity, telling the people of Gravity Falls that he was the Stanford they'd been expecting. He opened the building as a tourist trap called the Murder Hut, later renamed the Mystery Shack, and used the money to fund his living expenses and his ongoing research into reactivating the portal. Every single night, for 30 years, he went down into the basement and worked on bringing his brother home. He told no one. He let his own identity die. He lived under a stolen name, in a house that wasn't his, running a con that was genuine in all the ways that mattered. Because the money kept the lights on, and the lights kept the machine running, and the machine was the only way to fix what he had broken. When Dipper and Mabel arrive at the Mystery Shack, Stan is 20 years into this project, but still years away from completing it. His relationship with their parents means he knows whose kids these are. They're the grandchildren of his brother Shermie, and he agrees to watch them for the summer. This puts him in an impossible position. He genuinely cares for them, genuinely does not want them to get hurt, and is also conducting a highly classified secret operation in the basement that could kill everyone within a significant radius if something goes wrong. There are hints throughout Season 1 that something significant is happening below the surface of Stan's persona. The vending machine entrance to the secret room, his intense reaction to anything involving the portal, his knowledge of supernatural events that he consistently claims to know nothing about, the tattoo on his shoulder that the show teases in the Dipper's Guide shorts before revealing it's actually a burn scar from a specific incident connected to the portal's machinery. The moment of revelation. Stan activating the portal and Ford stepping through in the Season 1 finale is one of the most effectively constructed cliffhangers in animated television history, partly because the audience has been watching Stan for over a year and still didn't fully understand what he was doing. They knew he was hiding something. They didn't know that the thing he was hiding was an act of love so sustained and so complete that it had swallowed 30 years of his life. Mystery number 31 through 45 live in the cracks of Stan's history. How did he track down the other 2 journals? What did the town think happened to the real Stanford Pines? And how did Stan navigate the logistics of suddenly being a person who didn't officially exist? What happened in the years when the Mystery Shack's finances were failing and he had no money to continue the project? And perhaps most significantly, what did he feel down in that basement at night, alone with his brother's machine, knowing that every year that passed was another year Ford was lost somewhere he couldn't imagine? There's a moment in the show, and it's a small moment, the kind that Gravity Falls specializes in, where Dipper finds an old photograph of a young Stan. Stan looks at it for a beat too long. There's something in his expression that goes past nostalgia. It's closer to grief for a self that doesn't exist anymore. Alex Hirsch didn't need to put that in. He put it in anyway. Section 4. Bill Cipher, the triangle who ended a universe. Bill Cipher is one of the most interesting villains in modern animation. That's not a controversial statement. What might be slightly more surprising is why. It's not his power, although he is staggeringly powerful. It's not his design, although a yellow triangle with a single eye, a top hat, and a bow tie dressed up in Illuminati imagery is objectively one of the more creative villain concepts the medium has produced. It's his history. Because Bill Cipher, before he was anything that happened to Gravity Falls, was the catastrophic end of an entire dimension. He comes from a place called Euclidia, also known as the second dimension. This is a dimension where everything is flat, where two-dimensional existence is the only existence, and where an ancient civilization lived inside that flatness before Bill decided to liberate them. His description of what liberation meant is genuinely harrowing. He burned it. He destroyed his home universe and everyone in it because he wanted to see what lived beyond its edges. He wanted to experience three-dimensionality. He wanted more. After destroying Euclidia, Bill occupied the space left behind, or rather, the space between dimensions, a region called the Nightmare Realm, also cataloged as Dimension Zero. This is described as a seething, intergalactic foam existing between the membranes of stable universes, a place with no consistent physics, no predictable rules, nothing reliable or fixed. The Nightmare Realm has no solid ground, no stable objects, no constants. And Bill, who destroyed his own dimension in exchange for the right to experience the chaotic expanse beyond it, has spent at least 1 trillion years living in that instability, unable to fully enter any of the more structured dimensions he can see. That's the prison. He can perceive the three-dimensional world. He can enter minds within it. He can make deals and manipulate and whisper in dreams. But he cannot be present in the physical world in a meaningful way without being invited in, without someone making a deal that gives him access. He is a creature of infinite hunger and near infinite power who has been cage-adjacent for 1 trillion years, looking through the bars at a universe he wants to destroy. The design language around Bill is meticulous. His resemblance to the Eye of Providence on the back of the American dollar bill is intentional. Hirsch confirmed this, and confirmed that it's why the character is named Bill. He's literally American currency come to life as a cosmic nightmare. The bow tie, the top hat, the performative gentility of his manner, all of it is theatrical costuming that Bill uses to seem approachable and manageable when he first makes contact with someone. He presents himself as a charming eccentric with useful knowledge, a quirky mentor figure who happens to have answers to the questions you're most desperate to solve. The true nature of what he is only reveals itself gradually, and by the time the mask slips, the relationship is already too established to walk away from easily. His voice, which Alex Hirsch performs, is jovial and rhythmically strange, with an underlying quality that suggests something deeply wrong with the pattern of how words are being formed. It's too quick in some places and too slow in others. The friendliness feels rehearsed rather than genuine, the way that a person who has studied human behavior from the outside might construct an approximation of warmth without quite getting the internal experience right. Bill knows how to appear, but he has never been anything close to the things he performs being I. There are things about Bill that the show tells you indirectly. His one-eyed design means he cannot perceive depth naturally. He needs three-dimensional creatures to do things he physically cannot. His inability to remain in the physical world without a host or a rift means all of his power is contingent on cooperation, which is why he's so focused on manipulation. Everything Bill does is about getting someone else to open the door he cannot open himself. The flamboyance, the deal-making, the theatrical presentation, it's all salesmanship. He is, at his core, a salesman trying to get you to let him inside. The specific mechanics of his deals are worth paying close attention to. Bill can only possess a living being if that being consciously shakes his hand and agrees to the possession. He cannot enter Ford's mind in the finale because Ford has a metal plate installed in his skull that creates a barrier. He cannot escape Gravity Falls because of the town's natural weirdness magnetism. He cannot bypass the circle of protection created by unicorn hair. These limitations matter. Bill, for all his stated omnipotence, is comprehensively constrained. His trillion years in the nightmare realm have not given him freedom. They've given him time to think about all the ways he is still imprisoned. Mystery number 46 through 65 belong to Bill. Why did he choose Ford specifically out of the billions of minds he could have accessed? What deals has he made over the centuries before the show began? And what did they yield him? When he says he's been watching Gravity Falls for millennia, how much of the town's strange history is actually his doing? And most hauntingly of all, is he actually gone? Section 5. The deals Bill made and the people who made them. There are multiple deals made with Bill Cipher across the show's run, and every single one of them is worth examining carefully, because the mechanics of how Bill operates, what he asks for, what he gives, what the fine print turns out to be, tell you everything about his nature. The first significant deal we see in the show is the one involving Ford Pines, though this happened 30 years before the story begins, and we only learn about it gradually. Ford had hit a wall in his research. He'd come to Gravity Falls to study anomalies, he'd built a lab, he'd filled journals, and then he'd found a cave with ancient hieroglyphics that described an all-knowing being named Bill Cipher. The hieroglyphics also described a wheel of symbols that could defeat Bill, but Ford dismissed this part as mythology. He read the incantation that summoned Bill not as a ritual but as an academic exercise, the way a researcher might try any approach when other approaches have failed. Bill appeared in his mind as a muse, a source of inspiration, an entity of infinite knowledge who wanted to help brilliant minds achieve their potential. He offered Ford answers. Ford, who had never encountered anything he couldn't eventually understand through persistent effort, found that his usual approach wasn't working on the fundamental question of why Gravity Falls was strange. Bill offered a shortcut, and Ford, who was brilliant but isolated and increasingly desperate for validation, accepted it. The deal was simple enough on its surface. Bill would provide Ford with the scientific insights needed to complete the interdimensional portal in exchange for access to Ford's mind. Free passage in and out whenever he wished. Ford, who didn't fully understand what Bill was, agreed. And for years, this arrangement seemed to work. The portal progressed. Ford's research flourished. Bill visited regularly in his dreams and fed him exactly the information he needed. What Ford didn't understand until nearly too late was that the portal wasn't designed to open a door to a dimension of infinite knowledge. It was designed to open a door for Bill Cipher specifically, allowing him physical entry into the three-dimensional world. The years of collaboration had been Bill playing a very long game. And the moment Fiddleford McGucket got accidentally pulled through the portal during testing and came back mentally shattered by something he'd seen through the other side, Ford understood enough to be terrified. He ended the project. He hid the journals. He tried to close off everything that Bill could use. He reached out to Stan as a last resort, wanting to get Journal 1 as far away as possible. And then Stan fell through the portal and the door was shut, and Ford spent 30 years in interdimensional space while Bill spent 30 years waiting. The second major deal is the one in Sock Opera, second season. This one involves Dipper. Bill approaches him during a desperate moment when Dipper needs information quickly and has no other options. The deal. Bill gets to use Dipper's body for a single night, and in exchange, Dipper gets the information he needs. Dipper agrees, and Mabel spends the episode trying to force Bill out of her brother's body before he can destroy the laptop containing critical research. What's significant about the Sock Opera deal is the way Bill negotiates it. He appears at exactly the moment when Dipper is most vulnerable. He offers something that specifically addresses the thing Dipper most wants right now. He frames the arrangement as reasonable and fair. He acknowledges, casually, as if it's barely worth mentioning, that there's a cost, but presents that cost as trivial compared to what Dipper gets. The entire sequence is a case study in how a skilled manipulator extracts consent from someone who doesn't fully understand what they're agreeing to. Gideon's deal is the earliest in the show's timeline and involves summoning Bill through a ritual to get access to Stan's mind and steal the deed to the Mystery Shack. Gideon has Journal too. He knows enough about Bill to summon him, but not enough to understand what he's dealing with. Bill does what Gideon asks, but makes clear in every moment of their interaction that he finds Gideon tedious and is doing this because it suits him, not because he particularly values the relationship. Gideon treats Bill as a tool. Bill treats Gideon as a useful distraction. The most devastating deal in the show is the one made quietly, off-screen, by a character who never had the power to negotiate on equal terms with anything. Fiddleford McGucket, who didn't make a deal at all, but who bore the consequences of Ford's deal more directly and more permanently than Ford himself. McGucket was Ford's research partner and friend. He helped build the portal. When he was accidentally pulled through during testing, what he saw was Bill Cipher's true nature, what actually waits in the nightmare realm, what was actually going to come through the door they were building. He survived physically, but something in his mind didn't survive intact. He spent the rest of his life erasing his own memory with a device he built for exactly that purpose, becoming progressively more unhinged with every wipe until he didn't even remember what he was trying to forget. McGucket's is the tragedy that nobody was watching happen. He didn't get a clean break. He didn't even get the clarity of understanding what had happened to him. He just got the static, the noise, the scrambled system running badly on hardware that had been partially deleted. His descent into what the town knew as Old Man McGucket happened over 30 years while Stan was in the basement, and Ford was in another dimension, and nobody was checking on the person who saw what the portal was actually for. Mystery numbers 66 through 80 are about the deals. What exactly did McGucket see through the portal? What did the deal between Ford and Bill look like from Bill's side of the negotiation? How many other deals has Bill made throughout Gravity Falls history with people we never see over the centuries he'd been observing the town? And when Bill offers someone everything they've ever wanted, does he know before the deal is struck exactly how he's going to take it back? Section 6. The Society of the Blind Eye and the Town That Forgot Everything. Here is a question that the show does not ask directly, but that starts to feel more and more uncomfortable the longer you think about it. Why doesn't anyone in Gravity Falls seem to notice that their town is supernaturally insane? Gravity Falls has gnomes living in the forest that routinely attempt to kidnap people. There are creatures in the lake. Time travelers appear and disappear. The local convenience store is haunted by ghosts. There are living wax figures, a monster made entirely of the discarded shapes of pines, a prehistoric creature living under the golf course, and a literal underground bunker containing a shape-shifting entity that has been living there for decades. Any one of these things should have generated national news coverage. None of them do. The town goes about its business as though the supernatural is simply not happening. That is not an accident. That is policy. Beneath the Gravity Falls Museum of History, accessible through a hidden entrance concealed behind a fireplace in the Eye exhibit, there is a circular underground chamber. And in that chamber, a secret organization calling itself the Society of the Blind Eye has been systematically erasing the memories of anyone in town who witnesses something they weren't supposed to witness, using a ray gun invented by Fiddleford McGucket in 1982. The symbol of the society, an eye crossed out with an X, has been hidden in the background art of the show from early in the first season, well before the society is ever revealed. In the Gulf War episode, in Seuss and the Real Girl, on walls, in graffiti, in places you'd only notice if you were looking. The society was founded with what its members sincerely believed were good intentions. Gravity Falls is a town that accumulates supernatural trauma. The people who live there, going about their ordinary lives, keep stumbling into things that shatter their understanding of how the world works. McGucket built the memory device originally to help himself forget his own trauma. And then he had the idea that other people might benefit from the same service. He offered the town a way to not have to carry the weight of knowing about the gnomes in the forest and the ghost in the convenience store, and the time traveler who showed up that one Tuesday. The society cleaned the slate. Everyone could go back to their lives without the unbearable cognitive dissonance of knowing that their town was cosmically unhinged. The problem is what the society became after McGucket's mind deteriorated to the point where he was no longer in charge of it. Blind Ivan, the leader in the present-day story, runs it not as a charitable service but as a control mechanism. The society erases memories indiscriminately, targeting people not just to protect them but to prevent awkward questions, to maintain the appearance of normalcy, to serve the institutional interest of an organization that no longer clearly remembers why it exists. Society members also use the device on themselves, which explains some of the more peculiar behavioral traits of various background townspeople. The man who married a woodpecker, for example. Repeated use of the memory gun causes progressive cognitive damage, and several of the society's own members have been quietly destroying themselves with the same tool they use to help the community. There's something genuinely dark in the philosophy of the Blind Eye Society that the show doesn't fully state, but that's clearly present. The idea that ignorance is a form of protection, that people are better off not knowing things that might disturb them, that the appropriate response to disturbing knowledge is not to process it and develop resilience, but to simply remove it, as if the experience never happened. Blind Ivan makes this argument almost philosophically when the gang confronts the society, and it's not entirely without merit on the surface. People do have bad memories they'd rather forget. Knowing that gnomes are real probably is more distressing than not knowing. But the society has crossed the line from offering a service to enforcing an ideology. They do not ask. They do not give people the choice. Lazy Susan is dragged off the street screaming, and her memory is erased against her will because she saw some gnomes stealing a pie. That's not protection. That is the removal of a person's right to their own experience of reality. The Hall of the Forgotten, where all the erased memories are stored in glass tubes, is one of the most quietly devastating images in the show. Thousands of tubes, thousands of experiences that belong to specific people in the town who are living without them, not knowing what's missing, living with the gaps as though those gaps were always there. Some people might notice that their reasoning has a hole in it, that there's a period they can't account for, that their sense of their own history has a fuzzy region. They'll have no idea why. The society just moved on to the next person who saw something they shouldn't have. Mystery number 81 through 93 are in the Hall of the Forgotten. What memories are in those tubes? Who were the most significant witnesses to Gravity Falls history whose accounts were systematically erased? Did anyone outside the society know this was happening? And the question that the show doesn't answer. When the society was disbanded and the current members had their own memories wiped at the end of the episode, what happened to all those glass tubes? Are those memories still down there somewhere under the History Museum in a pneumatic storage system that nobody is maintaining anymore? Section 7. McGucket's Tragedy. The Man Who Erased Himself. Fiddleford Old Man McGucket is the saddest character in Gravity Falls. I don't think this is a close competition. He starts as comic relief. The show introduces him as the town eccentric, a wild-haired old man living in the junkyard surrounded by machines he builds from scrap, muttering incoherently, occasionally delivering what sounds like gibberish but turns out, if you slow down the audio and listen carefully, to be something else entirely. In one of his earliest appearances, what sounds like nonsense ham-bone-style chanting actually contains hidden messages. One says, "Please help me." Another says, "Oh God." Another says, "Thanks for opening my eyes." The show hid a man's genuine psychological distress inside his apparent meaningless rambling, and most people laughed at it on first viewing. McGucket was one of the most brilliant engineers of his generation. He graduated from Backups University, the same school Ford attended after his original choice fell through, 3 years ahead of schedule. He built a successful personal computers company called Fiddleford McGucket in Palo Alto, California. In the 1970s, which would have put him in the actual cultural moment when Silicon Valley was being invented, when the people who would go on to build the companies that defined the late 20th century were working out of garages and university computer labs. McGucket was there, and he was the kind of person who fit that world. He and Ford met at Backups and became friends in the way that people with exceptional intellects and unusual interests sometimes do. Quickly, completely, with the kind of mutual recognition that makes the rest of the world seem slightly less isolating. When Ford came to Gravity Falls and needed a brilliant engineer to help build a device unlike anything anyone had ever attempted, McGucket was his first call. The Portal project consumed years of both their lives. And then, during what should have been a routine testing phase, the portal did something unpredicted, and McGucket was pulled through it. He survived. He came back out. But what he saw through the dimensional membrane in those moments of exposure was enough to break something fundamental in how his mind processed reality. He had seen what was on the other side. He had seen what the portal was actually for. He had seen the nightmare realm, or something in it, or someone in it, and come back knowing things that no human being was equipped to know. He built the memory device in an act of profound desperation. He used it on himself once to erase the experience. It worked. The horror was gone. He felt better. He used it again a few days later when some residual nightmare made it back to consciousness. Then again. Every time he felt the creeping edge of what he'd seen trying to resurface, he used the device. Each use degraded his mind slightly, like a document that's been photocopied from a photocopy too many times, losing definition with every generation. By the time he founded the Blind Eye Society in 1982, roughly 17 days after he'd built the device, his short-term memory was already compromised. By the early 2000s, he couldn't remember anything before 1982. By the time Dipper and Mabel arrive in Gravity Falls, he doesn't know who he is. There is a detail in the Society of the Blind Eye episode that becomes genuinely painful on rewatch. When the gang finds McGucket's memory tube in the Hall of the Forgotten, it's on a special shelf, elevated above the others, given a place of prominence. The Society, who remember nothing of their own origins, have nonetheless instinctively treated McGucket's erased memories as something special, something that needed to be kept separate and safe. The institutional memory of the organization has preserved the thing that the organization's founder spent decades destroying in himself. The memories are right there. They've been right there the whole time. Nobody thought to give them back. When the memories are finally restored at the end of the episode, when McGucket pieces together who he was and what happened to him, his response is not anger or devastation. It's grief. Clean, clear grief for 30 years of a brilliant life spent as a ghost version of himself, haunting the junkyard, building contraptions for reasons he couldn't explain, maintaining a fractured connection to technical genius while everything else dissolved. He cries. And then he starts to rebuild. There is a version of the McGucket story that could have been different if Ford had listened to Fiddleford's warning about what the portal was really opening, if Ford had shut it down before the accident happened, if McGucket had told someone what he'd seen instead of immediately trying to erase it. If any single point in the chain had bent the other way, there would have been no Blind Eye Society, no 30 years of systematic erasure, and a brilliant person's mind would have stayed intact. McGucket's tragedy is not just personal, it's structural. It happened because several intelligent people made understandable mistakes at specific moments, and the cost was paid over decades by someone who had less power than any of the others involved. Mystery number 94 through 105 are about McGucket's inner world. What exactly did he see through the portal during those few seconds of exposure? The show is deliberately vague here. We see his eyes fill with horror. We see the other side of the portal as somewhere immense and impossible, but we don't get a clear picture. Ford spent 30 years in that dimension without the psychic damage McGucket suffered in a few moments, which suggests Ford's exposure was different. More gradual, perhaps, or approached differently. What did McGucket specifically perceive that was more immediately devastating than the sustained exposure that shaped Ford's research, but didn't destroy him? The answer to that question would tell us something important about both the nightmare realm and the fundamental difference between these two men. Section 8. The Cipher Wheel and the prophecy that was always there. Every character who appears in the Gravity Falls finale, every person who ends up in the circle, standing with hands joined, attempting to perform the ritual that should destroy Bill Cipher, is represented by a symbol that has been visible in the show's opening credits since day one. The Cipher Wheel is an ancient artifact from the indigenous history of Gravity Falls, predating any of the events of the show by what the mythology implies are centuries. It was discovered by Ford during his research and depicted in Journal 3. The wheel shows a circle of symbols around a central image of Bill, the yellow triangle, the single eye. And the ancient inhabitants of the Gravity Falls region believed that when all the symbols were united and the circle was completed, it would produce a force capable of destroying him. Ford dismissed this as superstition the first time he encountered it. He was a scientist. He trusted data, methodology, peer review. The idea that a circle of people holding hands because ancient drawings told them to would defeat a trillion-year-old interdimensional demon did not fit his epistemological framework. He wrote it off. This turns out to be one of the more consequential intellectual failures in the show's narrative. The symbols map to specific people with a precision that only becomes clear in retrospect. The pine tree is Dipper, whose real name, never revealed on screen but hinted at in various places, appears to relate to pines, and who wears the pine tree hat for most of the show's run. The shooting star is Mabel, who decorates everything she owns with shooting stars, and whose sweater in the credits sometimes features them. The six-fingered hand is Ford, whose polydactyly defines his physical identity. The question mark is Sos, who is defined by his enthusiastic openness to the unknown, and whose default posture is that of someone who doesn't quite know what's happening but is willing to engage with it anyway. The ice bag is Stan, which requires a little more interpretation. It's connected to his injury history and his general demeanor as someone who has taken a lot of hits and keeps going. The llama is Pacifica, whose family has a llama statue on the grounds of the Northwest estate. The spectacles are McGucket. The pentagram is Gideon. The heart is Wendy, or possibly represents love as a concept. And the crescent and crown belong to the last slot. When all of these people finally stand together in Weirdmageddon's conclusion, the audience who has watched the opening credits carefully enough can feel the weight of the moment as the show completes the picture it sketched in the very first frame. The prophecy is real. The ancient people of Gravity Falls were right. The symbols have meaning. Ford was wrong to dismiss it. There's a detail that Gravity Falls does quietly in the background of the scene where everyone is finally assembled, the moment when the ritual almost works. Stan and Ford, who have spent the bulk of the Season 2 arc working through their damaged relationship, can't hold it together long enough. They start bickering. The energy of the circle breaks. Bill capitalizes. Everyone except the twins gets turned into various objects and surfaces, and the plan fails. The prophecy required unity. It required all the symbols to be genuinely aligned, not just physically proximate. And Stan and Ford's unresolved conflict, the specific rupture that started the whole story 30 years ago, is precisely what breaks the circle at the critical moment. The ancient prophecy accounted for the human factor, and the human factor failed. It's a detail that hurts more on rewatch because it's so comprehensible. The fate of everything hung on two stubborn old men being able to set aside decades of grief and guilt for 30 seconds. They couldn't. What ultimately defeats Bill isn't the prophecy. It's the solution that doesn't appear anywhere in Ford's journals or in the ancient hieroglyphics. Stan's sacrifice. The decision to let Bill into a mind that doesn't contain the equation he needs, and then to erase that mind completely so Bill goes down with it. It's not a prophesied victory. It's a person who loves his family making a completely unexpected choice. The oldest stories said there was a way. The actual way turned out to be something the old stories never anticipated. Mystery numbers 106 through 116 center on the Cipher Wheel and the prophecy. Where did the ancient knowledge of Gravity Falls come from? Who were the people who built the wheel and predicted that these specific 10 symbols would be the ones needed? Is the prophecy truly connected to the natural law of weirdness magnetism? Or is its specificity something that Bill himself somehow influenced? Another long game played across centuries, engineering the conditions of his own apparent defeat? Because if Bill is smart enough to manipulate a genius like Ford over years, he's smart enough to think about what happens if he loses. Section 9. Blendin Blandin and the Time Travel Problem. Gravity Falls has a time travel episode fairly early in Season 1, The Time Traveler's Pig. And it does what good time travel episodes do. It has a pig, it has emotional stakes, and it is secretly far more complicated than it appears. Blendin Blandin, the time traveler from the year 207,012 who shows up at the mystery fair, is introduced as a bumbling background character, the kind of oblivious authority figure who creates unintentional chaos by existing in the wrong time. Dipper and Mabel steal his time tape device, create a series of branching timelines trying to help Waddles and Wendy, and then later trying to get Mabel her pig back, and ultimately have to fix the timeline damage they've caused before returning the device. It's charming and funny, and has a genuinely lovely moment at the end, where Dipper sacrifices his chance to fix his own situation to make sure Mabel gets Waddles. But here's what's happening in the background. The Time Paradox, Avoidance Enforcement Squadron, the organization Blendin works for, is aware that Gravity Falls is an anomalous location in the timeline. Time travelers have been visiting the area for reasons the organization monitors, including to avoid the consequences of the specific kinds of temporal events that keep occurring there. Blendin's job, when we meet him, is to clean up the mess that time travelers leave behind, which implies that time travelers have been visiting Gravity Falls regularly enough to require dedicated cleanup resources. This becomes more significant later when we learn that Bill Cipher has a relationship with the time travel organization and has at some point successfully manipulated events so that Blendin Blandin can be used as a vessel. The Blendin who appears in The Dipper and Mabel versus the Future episode of Season 2 is possessed by Bill, using the body to get close to Mabel and extract the interdimensional rift. This means Bill had an asset positioned in the time travel organization. He had a way in before Weirdmageddon began. The question this raises is how long Bill had been working on the Blendin angle. Time travelers, by definition, are not constrained by linear cause and effect in the same way regular characters are. Bill, who can visit dreams across time as well as space, could theoretically have been setting up the Blendin play for decades or centuries. The fact that Blendin appeared at the mystery fair and got his device stolen by Dipper and Mabel, and the specific way that event plays out, might not be the accident it appears to be. There are also temporal loop implications in the show that Hirsch has carefully left ambiguous. Blendin explicitly says at one point, after learning about the twins' adventures and suffering because of them, that he is going to make them pay, establishing a grudge. This grudge becomes significant later. But the series of events that created the grudge could only have happened because of the time tape incident. And the time tape incident required Blendin to have been at the mystery fair in the first place. Why was Blendin there? To clean up time travel messes. Why was there a time travel mess? The loop is circular in ways that may be intentional. The year 207,012 is a number the show throws out casually. The website Easter egg that decodes to time travel is real. References Blendin and a stopwatch. The organization he works for is described as monitoring every significant temporal event in human history. The fact that Gravity Falls registers as a location, significant enough to assign a recurring agent to it, tells you something about the scale of what the town represents in the show's cosmology. This is not just a weird Oregon town. On at least some timeline authorities' maps, this is a priority site. The Blendin's Game episode, where Seuss and Mabel have to fight in gladiatorial time combat to restore Blendin's existence after the events of the time tape incident left him erased from the timeline, is one of the more emotionally complex episodes in the show, precisely because it buries its emotional content under layers of game show parody. Seuss wins. Blendin's existence is restored. And then Seuss gets to spend one day with his absent father, which is what he's always wanted, until the episode reveals that the father who shows up is not real, and what Seuss wanted was never something that was going to arrive on schedule. That emotional turn from triumphant adventure to quiet grief in the space of about 4 minutes is Gravity Falls doing what it does best, using its weirdest concept to deliver its most human moment. Mystery numbers 117 through 125 involve the time travel mechanics. Given that Blendin is from the future and presumably knows how the events of the summer conclude, what does the Time Paradox Avoidance Enforcement Squadron's records say about Gravity Falls? Do they have a file on what Weirdmageddon was? Do they know it happened? And if time travel is real, as the show insists, what does it mean that nobody travels back to prevent any of it? Section 10. Pacifica Northwest, the bell, and the architecture of a person. Shaped by fear. In the beginning, Pacifica Northwest is a villain, or something close to one. She is sharp-tongued, condescending, classist, and relentlessly focused on maintaining her social position at Mabel's expense. She has the town's approval because her family has money and status, and the name of the person who supposedly founded Gravity Falls. She wears it all with practiced ease, the casual cruelty of someone who has never been challenged by circumstances. On first viewing, she reads as a type, the rich mean girl who exists to create social friction for the protagonist's friend. The show seems to confirm this reading for most of the first season, keeping Pacifica in that lane and using her as a recurring antagonist for Mabel's subplots. And then Northwest Mansion mystery happens, and the entire architecture shifts. The episode starts with a ghost haunting the Northwest family estate, Archibald Corduroy, a lumberjack who died in a mudslide caused by the Northwest's deforestation, who left a dying curse that would turn all the Northwest guests to wood unless the family fulfilled an ancient promise to open the mansion to the common people. Dipper is brought in to deal with it, and the episode reveals, in a series of carefully staged moments, exactly what Pacifica's home life actually looks like behind the grand exterior. The most devastating image is the bell. Preston Northwest rings it whenever Pacifica says or does something that doesn't align with his expectations, and she stops mid-sentence, immediately falls silent, and waits for approval. Like a behavioral reflex, like a conditioned response. The show presents this without comment, without a character saying, "This is what abuse looks like." It just shows you the bell and the response and lets you understand what that means. This is Pavlovian conditioning applied by a father to his daughter over years until compliance is reflexive rather than chosen. Preston isn't just a bad parent in the abstract sense of being neglectful or cold. He has engineered a specific psychological mechanism in his child. The cruelty that Pacifica displays toward the Pines twins and toward Mabel is not innate. It is the behavior of someone who was taught to see cruelty as normal, who was shaped by an environment in which the performance of superiority was non-negotiable, where any deviation was met with punishment that the child learned to anticipate and preemptively avoid. Dipper's journal entry about Pacifica, visible in the Physical Journal 3 companion book published after the show, describes her parents punishing disobedience with groundings and credit card cutoffs. The combination of the physical conditioning and the financial control creates a total environment. Pacifica cannot rebel because everything she has access to is contingent on compliance. The mansion, the clothes, the social position, all of it flows from her parents' approval. And they have made sure she understands this. The episode's climax involves Pacifica having to open the mansion gates to save everyone, including the party guests who are being turned to wood. To do this, she has to directly defy her father's explicit order. And the show takes its time with this. It doesn't happen quickly. She stands at the gate lever with her father demanding she step away, and you can see in her face the calculation and the terror and the years of conditioning fighting against something that just slightly exceeds the fear. She opens the gates. Her final act of rebellion in the episode is small by any objective measure, walking across her parents' favorite silver-patterned carpet with muddy shoes. But it carries the weight of everything the episode has built, because what it represents is not just a dirty carpet. It's the first time in her life that she has taken a deliberate action she knows her parents will punish her for, and done it anyway, in a spirit of pure freedom. She smiles while she does it. The show doesn't give Pacifica a clean ending. Her family loses the mansion by the finale. Her parents survive Weirdmageddon but are significantly diminished. She is last seen at Dipper and Mabel's departure, having signed the goodbye card, having bought them gifts, having stepped firmly across the line into the territory of being someone who is not her parents. The conditioning isn't erased. That's not how conditioning works. But something broke open in the Northwest mansion that night, and Pacifica found the edge of herself inside it. Mystery numbers 126 through 130 are about what happened after the mansion episode ended. The show doesn't show us what Preston's reaction was when he found Pacifica had defied him in front of everyone. It doesn't show what the weeks between the mansion and Weirdmageddon looked like for Pacifica at home. What did compliance look like under those circumstances? What did resistance look like? The gap in the narrative is probably not an accident. Some things don't need to be shown to be understood. Section 11, Seuss, Wendy, and the Texture of Gravity. Falls as a place. Gravity Falls works as a show not just because of its central mysteries, but because of its supporting texture. The town feels inhabited in ways that most animated series don't quite achieve. And a significant part of that texture lives in the people immediately around the Pines family. Seuss Ramirez, full name Jesus, pronounced Jesus, though nobody in the town calls him that, is the Mystery Shack's handyman and the most reliably good-natured person in the show. He's 22, he never left Gravity Falls after growing up there, and he exists in a state of perpetual, generous bewilderment at the strangeness of the world around him. He functions as a third sibling for Dipper and Mabel, someone older than them but approaching the world with a similar mixture of openness and wonder. The element of Seuss's character that the show handles with surprising delicacy is his absent father. His father left when Seuss was very young and has never returned. Every year, Seuss has written his father a birthday card and never received a response. The show doesn't dramatize this in a big emotional scene. It exists as a constant, gentle presence in Seuss's characterization, something that shapes his enthusiasm for family and for belonging without ever being spelled out as trauma. He makes himself available as family to people who need it, because he understands on some level what it feels like to have a gap in that part of your life. Alex Hirsch confirmed in interviews that Seuss is based on a real person, a friend named Jesus from college, who had a similar quality of generous, slightly confused warmth. The character was created to inhabit the show's emotional center in a way that the twins, who are children navigating extraordinary circumstances, couldn't always manage. Seuss is the heart of the Mystery Shack staff. When Stan eventually hands the shack over to him at the end of the show, it is both professionally sensible and emotionally inevitable. Wendy Corduroy is 15, the daughter of Manly Dan, a logger of enormous size and extremely limited emotional range. She is a cashier at the Mystery Shack who spends most of her working hours leaning on the counter reading magazines or finding new places in the building to nap. She is Dipper's unrequited crush, which she is aware of, and handles with the deft kindness of someone who has enough life experience not to be cruel about it, while also not pretending it isn't there. Wendy is interesting because she occupies a specific emotional position. She is the most grounded person in the main cast. She has been living in Gravity Falls her whole life and has a teenager's acquired indifference to the town's weirdness that sometimes looks like coolness and sometimes looks like genuine exhaustion. Her family is loud and chaotic in the specific way of households where everyone is physically overwhelming and emotionally armored. Her friendships have the quality of alliances among people who've decided to get through adolescence together with minimal casualties. She does not romanticize the summer the way Dipper and Mabel do because for her, it's not temporary. Gravity Falls is just where she lives. The show uses Wendy most effectively in moments where the twins need reality checking. She is the one who tells Dipper that chasing someone years older than him is not a good idea in words gentle enough not to humiliate him. She is the one who models how to function in difficult situations with a low-key competence that doesn't require drama to be effective. She is also, when pushed, quite capable of being genuinely brave. The Weirdmageddon sequences that feature her show someone who has been through a strange and terrible event and is responding to it with clear-eyed determination. The town of Gravity Falls itself, beyond its principal cast, is a place with accumulated history and texture. Lazy Susan at the diner, Sheriff Blubbs and Deputy Durland, whose relationship is eventually confirmed to be romantic in the show's conclusion, and whose dynamic throughout the show is one of the sweeter running threads in the background. Manly Dan and his sons, who constitute a kind of natural force in the woods, all muscle and enthusiasm and minimal reflection. Gideon's father Bud, who is a member of the Society of the Blind Eye. The recurring background figures who appear in multiple episodes, suggesting that Gravity Falls is small enough that you recognize faces. The show builds a town that feels like a town, specific and accumulated. the way places that have been lived in for a long time develop their own personality. Mystery numbers 131 through 138 live in the margins of the town's ordinary life. There are background characters in Gravity Falls who appear consistently enough to suggest stories the show chose not to tell. There are relationships implied by proximity and body language that are never given dialogue. The town has a history before the Pines family arrived, and after they leave, and Hirsch was always more interested in suggesting the existence of that history than in explaining it. Section 12. Background Easter eggs, hidden faces, and the number 618 Alex Hirsch's birthday is June 18th. In the notation used by Americans, that's June 18th. The number 618 appears in virtually every episode of Gravity Falls. Not prominently. This is not a number that characters discuss or that appears on important documents. It's in the background. It's on license plates, on signs, in the design of incidental objects, worked into background art with the casual precision of someone who is decorating a space they care about. The production team hid it consistently as a kind of ongoing tribute to their creator, and finding instances of it became a game for dedicated viewers. The bottom portion of Hirsch's face appears briefly in the falling Polaroid photos during the opening credits, visible for a fraction of a second in the cascade of images. He also appears as various incidental characters throughout the show. A man at a casino, a tourist at the Mystery Shack, one of the frozen bodies in Bill's throne of frozen agony during Weirdmageddon. The crew treated putting Hirsch into background shots as an ongoing game, and Hirsch treated it as a source of private amusement. There are several characters who show up in backgrounds before they become narratively significant. Blendon Blandon is visible in the crowd at the Mystery Fair before his episode ever starts. Agents Powers and Trigger, the government agents investigating Gravity Falls who become relevant in Season 2, are visible in the backgrounds of multiple Season 1 scenes once you know who they are. Behind playbills during Mabel's show and sock opera, at the mall in Seuss and the Real Girl, behind Seuss's car in the Society of the Blind Eye episode, at a music festival. They are conducting surveillance throughout the entire season before their introduction, and they are there to be found if anyone looks. The Society of the Blind Eye's crossed-out eye symbol appears in background graffiti throughout the first season, an episode set well before the Society is ever mentioned. Once you've seen the symbol in context, you start spotting it in retrospective rewatches in places you'd missed. On a wall in Gulf War, on a surface in a crowd scene. The secret society was always there in the background of its own secret. There is also the matter of the various creatures and entities that appear briefly in flash cuts within the opening theme, and in certain episodes more chaotic sequences. Bill Cipher's face appears in background imagery throughout the show in ways that only become obvious once you know what to look for. A triangular shadow cast at a strange angle, a pattern in wallpaper that resolves into a familiar shape if you look at it from the right distance, a quick frame in a sequence where the camera's motion would normally carry you past it. The show trained its most attentive viewers to notice these insertions, and then kept making them, a running visual language between the production team and the fraction of the audience paying that level of attention. The Rick and Morty connection is worth noting here. In the Society of the Blind Eye episode, there is a brief moment where the objects getting sucked into Stan's portal include a pen, a notepad, and a coffee mug. In the Rick and Morty episode, Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, which aired around the same time, those specific objects fall out of a portal Rick creates. This was a deliberate coordination between Alex Hirsch and Justin Roiland, a small, quiet acknowledgement of a shared cosmological space that both shows inhabit without ever directly addressing. Neither show ever made this explicit. It just sits there for the people who watch both. Mystery numbers 139 through 144 are about the things you haven't found yet, even on the 10th rewatch. The production team's commitment to hidden detail was systematic enough that there are almost certainly images and backgrounds, symbols and set dressing, and moments in crowd scenes that no one has documented comprehensively. The Gravity Falls wiki is extensive and meticulous, and there are still items in it tagged as unresolved. Every frame of every episode was built by people who had been told by their creator that secrets were worth hiding, and they took that directive seriously. Section 13. Weirdmageddon. What the end of the world actually looked like. Weirdmageddon is the three-part finale of Gravity Falls, and it is one of the most genuinely strange pieces of children's television ever broadcast. The three episodes span Gravity Falls in a state of complete reality collapse. The town transformed into a nightmarish landscape, most of the adult population petrified and stacked into an enormous throne of frozen human suffering. Bill Cipher, in physical form, wandering his domain like a god who has finally gotten what he's been waiting for, and the full cast of the show scattered and trying to find each other and figure out what to do. What makes Weirdmageddon work as a finale is that it delivers on the scale the show has been building toward while maintaining the emotional specificity that made the show matter in the first place. The world is ending, but the story is still about Stan and Ford's relationship. The world is ending, but Mabel's prison bubble, a physical manifestation of her wish for summer to never end, populated by creatures wearing the faces of people she loves, offering an endless, gentle reality without consequences, is specifically calibrated to her exact psychology. Bill didn't just imprison Mabel. He designed a trap that used her genuine desires as the mechanism of her confinement. The pyramid, the enormous inverted pyramid that Bill constructs as his base of operations in the ruined town, is a monument to the specific shape of his self-conception. He has always been the triangle with the eye. Now he lives inside a physical version of it at massive scale, surrounded by the wreckage of everything that was real before he arrived. The eye bats that patrol the town, the random weirdness bubbles that touch ordinary objects and transform them into chaotic hallucinations, the throne of frozen agony. All of this is Bill's aesthetic expressed at maximum power. It's what the nightmare realm would look like if it had a decorator. The show is careful to note that Bill cannot leave Gravity Falls. The town's natural weirdness magnetism forms an invisible barrier at its edges, and when Bill's henchmen attempt to extend Weirdmageddon beyond the town's borders, they simply hit it and fall back. The apocalypse is local. This is darkly funny and also precisely calibrated to the show's mythology. Gravity Falls has always been a place where the strange is contained, where the unusual stays unusual, where the rest of the world remains unaware. Even at the end of everything, the bubble holds. The rest of Oregon is fine. Ford's interrogation at Bill's hands, literally, Bill uses lightning to electrocute him trying to extract the equation that would allow the barrier to collapse, is one of the more genuinely disturbing sequences in the show. It's presented without comic relief, without the usual Gravity Falls tonal levity. Ford, who spent 30 years in other dimensions, who built the portal, who gave Bill his foothold in this world, is physically tortured by the consequence of every choice he made. Hirsch doesn't let Ford off the hook for his role in all of this, even as the show forgives him through the mechanism of his and Stan's ultimate reconciliation. The solution to Weirdmageddon is essentially a confidence trick. Ford's brilliance and Stan's life of grifting combine into a single act. Swap identities, let Bill think he's entering the mind that contains the equation, and make sure the mind he actually enters has already been emptied by the memory gun. Bill burns himself out trying to find information that isn't there, and goes down with the memories as Stan's mind wipes itself clean. What Stan loses in this moment, the entirety of his 60-something years of experience, the memories of his brother, of Dipper and Mabel, of the whole summer, everything, is framed by the show with enormous care. There's a scene where he doesn't recognize Dipper and Mabel when they approach him, and their faces and his face carry the full weight of what that costs. The mechanism of memory restoration, spending time with Stan, going through old objects and family photographs, slowly coaxing the associations back, takes time. Some of it comes back. Not all of it does. The show doesn't pretend otherwise. Stan's sacrifice is the most purely good thing any character in Gravity Falls does. He didn't do it for gratitude. He didn't do it to be recognized as a hero. He did it because there was nothing else he could do, and because after 30 years of doing things for other people's benefit while nobody knew about it, this was one more version of the same thing. The mystery of Stanley Pines, the central mystery of the whole show, is not a mystery about identity or deception. It's a mystery about love expressed through sustained, secret action. And its answer has always been the same as the answer to every question the show asks. The people you love are worth it. Mystery numbers 145 through 150 live in the aftermath of Weirdmageddon. What happened to Gravity Falls after reality snapped back? Who remembers what? The Society of the Blind Eye was already gone, so there's no mechanism to erase the collective memory of a full apocalypse having occurred in the town. What does Gravity Falls look like 6 months after Weirdmageddon? A year after? Do the petrified citizens retain any sensory memory of what it was like? Does Gravity Falls end up famous in the wider world, investigated, documented, pulled out of its special bubble of obscurity? And Bill Cipher's physical remains, the stone statue that exists somewhere in the Pacific Northwest of Oregon. What happens to it when the story is over? Section 14, The Cipher Hunt. When the mystery became real. What Alex Hirsch did after Gravity Falls ended is one of the most remarkable things a showrunner has ever done for their audience. He built a real-world version of the show's mythology and hid it in the physical world, spanning multiple countries with encrypted clues leading from location to location, designed for exactly the kind of fan that the show had spent 4 years cultivating. The Cipher Hunt began on July 20th, 2016, several months after the series finale aired. Hirsch tweeted what appeared to be an ordinary image, but encoded within it were multiple ciphertexts and coordinates and hints. When decoded, they revealed the starting point of a global treasure hunt, a clue hidden at Kazan Cathedral in St. Petersburg, Russia. The treasure being sought was a real, physical statue of Bill Cipher, briefly visible at the end of the series finale in footage that showed it standing in an Oregon forest. The statue had been built by Fawn Davis, a movie prop fabricator, out of plexiglass, coated with a mixture of glue and seeds so it would grow moss and appear as though it had been in the woods for years. Hirsch had installed it in Reedsport, Oregon, on a property whose owner had agreed to let him use it before the finale even aired. He then incorporated a few seconds of footage of the statue into the final episode, as both a real-world proof of the thing's existence and a teaser for the hunt to come. The clues spanned the planet. From St. Petersburg, Russia, the hunt moved to a shrine in Japan, Kanda Myojin Shrine in Tokyo, where a wooden plaque had been left with encoded text. From Japan, it moved to Atlanta, Georgia, hidden near a specific address connected to Ponce de Leon Avenue. There was a clue requiring fans to call a phone number listed on a lost pig poster seeking waddles. There was a clue requiring the assembly of a 2,000-piece jigsaw puzzle of Bill Cipher. There was a clue hidden on a USB drive inside a black pouch near the Century Plaza Towers in Century City, Los Angeles, found with the help of Gravity Falls cast member Jason Ritter and Alex Hirsch's actual twin sister Ariel, who showed up in person to participate in the hunt. The final stretch of clues led through Oregon, to Stanley Street in a small town called Amity, where a hidden geocache bolt in a telephone pole contained a strip of paper. From there to Enchanted Forest, an amusement park in Turner, Oregon, which yielded the final clue. And from the final clue, using a technique derived from an old urban legend video game called Polybius, fans decoded a pattern in the trees behind the original image of the statue and traced it to the corner of a street in Reedsport. A Twitter user named Shadow_Wolfwind arrived at the statue on August 2nd, 2016, and tweeted a photograph. The hunt had spanned 13 days in 3 countries and involved thousands of fans collaborating across the internet in real time. The winner received a sash reading Mayor of Gravity Falls and found a treasure chest buried at the statue's base containing Russian and Japanese currency, a music box playing the Gravity Falls theme, a miniature Bill Cipher statue, a special edition copy of Journal 3 with drawings by Hirsch, and a USB drive with a message from Grunkle Stan. The rules Hirsch had established for the hunt included one that felt like it was from the show itself. If you encounter Bill, whatever you do, don't shake his hand. He was warning fans about a physical object, but the warning has the texture of something much older, a piece of knowledge passed down from someone who knew exactly what shaking that particular hand could cost. The Bill Cipher statue eventually ended up at Confusion Hill, a roadside attraction in Piercy, California, where it found its permanent home. People still visit it, people still photograph themselves next to it, and per the tradition established by Hirsch's warning, there are many people in those photographs who are very deliberately keeping their hands at their sides. Section 15, The Book of Bill and What Comes After. In 2024, Alex Hirsch published The Book of Bill, a physical artifact narrated from Bill Cipher's perspective and structured as the kind of chaotic, unreliable document that Bill himself would produce if given a platform. It debuted on the Amazon and New York Times bestseller lists, and it expanded the mythology of Gravity Falls in ways that the show had always gestured toward but never fully articulated. The Book of Bill explicitly confirms details about Bill's origin that the show kept ambiguous. The nature of Euclidia, what happened to it, the mechanics of how Bill ended up in the nightmare realm, and various elements of his psychology and history that provide context for his behavior in the show. It also introduces the concept of the Theraprism, a prison dimension created specifically to contain Bill after Weirdmageddon, and implies that the events of the show may not have been as final as they appeared. This is the question that hovers over the entire Gravity Falls mythology in its post-show phase. Is Bill actually gone? The show leaves this appropriately ambiguous. The physical remains of Bill's body after the memory gun incident become a stone statue. The petrified Bill appears in the finale's credits sequence, visible in the Oregon forest. The Cipher hunt centered around that statue as a real object, but Bill has always operated on the assumption that physical form is a convenience rather than a necessity. He spent 1 trillion years in the nightmare realm without a body. The version of him that was defeated was the version that had temporarily achieved physical presence. Whether the essence of Bill, the triangular consciousness that has been navigating dimensions for longer than human civilization has existed, whether that was truly erased along with Stan's memories, or simply displaced back into the interstice between worlds, is something the show declines to answer definitively. There is a moment at the very end of the finale, after the credits, where a short piece of coded text appears. When decoded, it reads, "Goodbye, Gravity Falls." 2 words, the most melancholy valediction possible. Not the end, not farewell. Goodbye, the word you use when you're the one leaving, or when you're watching something leave. It has the quality of a message written by someone who knows they won't be back for a while. Alex Hirsch has said in interviews over the years that Gravity Falls ended where it needed to end, and that he made the decision to finish it rather than let it continue past its natural conclusion. The show ran for 40 episodes. Every episode was written with awareness of where the whole thing was going. That kind of structural intentionality is rare in any medium, and especially rare in television, which usually runs until it stops rather than ending where it means to. An art book called The Art of Gravity Falls, announced for release in September 2026, and described as the definitive visual history of the series, promises never-before revealed development art from Hirsch's personal archives, including lost episode ideas, cut jokes, and hidden Easter eggs. This is a show that, more than 10 years after its finale, is still generating new material to find, still hiding new things in old images, still trusting that someone will look carefully enough. Section 16. Alex Hirsch, The Real Summers, and Why Any of This Exists. Every story comes from somewhere. Gravity Falls comes from a cabin in the woods, a great aunt named Lois, and summers spent in enforced imagination when Alex and Ariel Hirsch were between 9 and 13 years old. The Hirsch twins grew up in Piedmont, California. Their parents divorced when they were young. Between ages 9 and 13, they spent their summers with their great aunt Lois at her cabin, in an environment that Alex has described as deliberately low stimulation, limited entertainment options, structured reading time, the specific boredom of a woodland setting that has no particular plans for you. He has said that this enforced emptiness made his imagination work harder. When there's nothing to consume, you start to produce. He produced fantasies. He wished for monsters. He wanted the forest to be stranger than it was. Dipper Pines is Alex Hirsch at 12, neurotic and over-prepared, carrying metaphorical cameras everywhere he went, trying to experience the world with complete documentation. The name Dipper, never given a last name explanation within the show, and Hirsch has always refused to confirm Dipper's actual first name, carries the quality of a nickname given for reasons that the person using it has internalized without needing to explain. Mabel Pines is Ariel Hirsch. Wacky sweaters, new crushes every week, entirely at peace with her own silliness in a way that her twin brother found both bewildering and deeply admirable. Grunkle Stan is based on Hirsch's grandfather, also named Stan. The physical description, big, barrel-chested, buttons perpetually threatening to give way on his shirt, gold chain, gold rings, is biographical. The Grunkle title, a portmanteau of great uncle, came from what Hirsch and his sister called their own great aunt, Granty. He preserved the emotional texture of the relationship while modifying the details. Soos Ramirez is based on a real person named Jesus who Hirsch knew in college. The character's defining quality, the generous, warmly confused quality of someone who wants to help and is never quite sure what's happening but commits fully anyway, was present in the original person, and Hirsch transferred it faithfully into the fictional version. He has said that this friend was the kind of person who gravitated to sticking around college even after he graduated. Always available, always willing, structurally incapable of withdrawal. Mabel's pig, Waddles, exists because Ariel Hirsch always wanted a pet pig. She built a shrine of pig objects in her room as a child. Hirsch gave his fictional sister the pig she never got in real life. That's the kind of detail that comes from actual knowledge of another person. The show's visual landscape, dense pine forests, overcast skies, roadside attractions, the specific Pacific Northwest quality of light and atmosphere, comes from the summers, from Lois's cabin, and the feeling of places where the ordinary world is slightly muffled and the imagination is slightly louder. Hirsch has mentioned specific locations, the mystery spot in California, the Oregon Vortex, a road sign for a town named Boring that he passed as a child. The show assembled these fragments into a composite Oregon that feels like a real place even though the specific town doesn't exist. The show was developed at Disney in an environment that was not always sympathetic to Hirsch's vision. Various elements were changed or cut at Disney's insistence throughout the run. In a video released for the show's 10-year anniversary, Hirsch detailed specific notes he received from the Standards and Practices Department. A same-sex couple that was cut from a background scene, a character arc that was softened, the relationship between the Love God episode's characters modified because Disney was uncomfortable with the specifics. Hirsch pushed back on all of it, won some of the arguments, and lost others. The song that plays over the Weirdmageddon finale, We'll Meet Again, was nearly cut because of the licensing cost. Hirsch sent emails containing only the word please until Disney relented and paid the thousands of dollars required to use it. The show's legacy, beyond its story and its secrets, is generational. The children who watched Gravity Falls during its original run in the years it aired, from 2012 to 2016, are now adults. They carry specific pieces of it. The ciphers that taught them about cryptography, the philosophy of the Blind Eye Society that taught them something about the difference between comfort and truth, the relationship between Stan and Ford that taught them something about the way love can be sustained through decades of unacknowledged sacrifice. These are not the lessons of a children's show that softens reality. These are the lessons of a show that trusted its audience to handle what it was actually saying. Section 17. Unanswered Mysteries. The questions that never got answers. Here's the thing about a show as deliberately constructed as Gravity Falls. The unanswered questions don't feel like accidents. They feel like choices. Dipper's actual first name has never been officially confirmed. Hirsch has acknowledged that Dipper has a real name that Dipper is a nickname for, has declined to say what it is, and has maintained this refusal consistently across decades of interviews and fan questions. It is the most asked unanswered question in the show's fandom. Various theories have circulated. Mason, based on some obscure hints. Other names based on pattern analysis of the show's Cipher system. Hirsch has neither confirmed nor denied any of them. The contents of what McGucket saw through the portal remain deliberately vague. We know it broke him. We know it was Bill-related. We know it was bad enough that erasing it once wasn't enough. That the memory kept finding its way back to the surface of his consciousness, requiring repeat applications of the gun until the cumulative damage became the new problem. The show strongly implies that McGucket perceived the true nature of the Nightmare Realm in a more direct way than any other character in the narrative. But what specifically that perception contained is left open. The question of what Gravity Falls is now, in the show's timeline, is never addressed. After Weirdmageddon, after reality resets, after the agents from the government organization are presumably going to investigate more aggressively, after the anomalies that existed in the town for centuries, what happens to Gravity Falls as a location? Does it stay weird? Does the weirdness magnetism persist? Do the gnomes and the creatures and the various entities Ford cataloged in his journals continue their existence, now without any blind eye society to keep the town from noticing them? The thing about Blendon Blandon being in the time travel organization and Bill having access to him, the implication that Bill had a mole in a timeline governing organization, is never fully explored. How long had that relationship been in place? What other assets did Bill have in various institutions across time? And the statue, the stone Bill Cipher statue. At the end of the finale, it exists. In the real world, it exists too. Hirsch constructed the show in a way where the line between its fiction and reality is thinner in some places than in others. The Cipher Hunt was an explicit invitation to cross that line, to treat the show's mysteries as inhabiting the same space as the audience's lives. The final question that Gravity Falls asks, below all its ciphers and codes and carefully hidden Easter eggs, is about the relationship between stories and the world they come from. Stories don't exist separately from the people who make them or the people who receive them. The ciphers in the credits were decoded by real people in real time. The Bill Cipher statue was found by a real person named Bradley Pick, who had never heard of the show and posted a picture of it to an online forum where it was eventually seen by someone who understood what it meant. The treasure chest in Reedsport, Oregon, had real Russian and Japanese currency in it, because Hirsch had physically collected those things during the trips where he left the clues. The music box that plays the Gravity Falls theme was wound by actual hands and placed in the actual dirt. Mystery Shack existed in reality before it existed in the show. A roadside attraction in California called the Mystery Spot served as one of the inspirations, and a GoFundMe campaign was launched in 2020 to save the building that most closely resembled the show's version of it. The line between the thing Alex Hirsch imagined during boring summers in the woods and the world where people who watched his imagination play out have built their own relationships with its contents. That line is movable. That's what Gravity Falls is, not a children's show that ended, a place that got real enough that people started visiting it. Section 18. Why Gravity Falls Gets Darker. Every single time you watch it. There's a specific reason that rewatching Gravity Falls hits differently at 25 than it did at 12. It's not just the Easter eggs you missed the first time, though those are there. It's that the show was built to age with the person watching it. At 12, you see the monsters and the codes and the mystery of who wrote the journals. You feel the thrill of the adventure and the gentle ache of the finale. When summer ends and Dipper and Mabel have to go home. It's a summer adventure. It's genuinely wonderful. At 16, you go back and you see something about growing up, about the specific terror and excitement of the moment when childhood starts becoming something else. Dipper's tension between wanting to mature quickly and the summer that keeps being summer. That reads differently when you're in the middle of it yourself. At 20, you start to see the family architecture. Stan and Ford's damaged relationship, the way that one accident in youth can shadow decades of adult life, the way that people who love each other can still hurt each other so thoroughly that the damage outlasts the original incident. You've started to see that pattern in the world around you, in your own family, in your friends' family, Ollie's. At 25, you see the manipulation. Bill and Ford's relationship, the years-long process of a brilliant person being slowly convinced that his best interests and his manipulator's best interests are the same thing, looks different once you've encountered that pattern in the real world. The flattery, the isolation, the way Ford's paranoia was carefully cultivated to cut him off from any relationship that might have given him perspective, these are not fantasy mechanics. These are recognizable things. At 30, you see all of it at once, and you see something else. The show knew you were going to come back. Alex Hirsch trusted that the people watching it at 12 would be the people watching it at 30, and he built layers for all of them. The Easter eggs for the careful child, the emotional complexity for the young adult, the structural darkness for the person who's lived enough to recognize it. The ciphers in the opening theme were teaching you cryptography. The Society of the Blind Eye was teaching you about the difference between comfort and truth. Ford's relationship with Bill was teaching you to recognize manipulation before you'd encountered it in a form that could hurt you. Pacifica's story was teaching you that you are not your parents before you'd had the chance to internalize the belief that you were. And Stan's whole arc, the 30-year secret, the memory sacrifice, the boat at the end with his brother, that was teaching you what love actually looks like when nobody is watching and nobody will ever know. These are gifts that a show gave to its audience. Hidden inside the comedy and the monsters and the summer adventure, some of them were always there, waiting for the viewer to grow into them. Some of them are still there, in the background of scenes you've seen 6 times, waiting for the rewatch that catches the thing all the previous ones missed. That's the last mystery. Not the statue in Oregon, not Dipper's real name, not what McGucket saw through the portal. The last mystery is the one you're still in the middle of, the one about what this particular story is to you, specifically at the specific moment you're watching it, and what it will mean to you the next time you come back. Outro, and that's 150, or somewhere in the neighborhood of it, because honestly, every section of this video probably contained more than it was labeled with, and the show probably contains more than any list can capture. That's the whole point of Gravity Falls. It's a mystery that doesn't end. It's a question that keeps having new answers depending on when you ask it. If you made it this far, genuinely, thank you. Whether you've been here since the beginning watching this with the lights off and something warm in your hands, or you drifted in and out, or you fell asleep somewhere around section 11 and are reading this on rewind, welcome. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Gravity Falls isn't a show about mysteries. It's a show about what mysteries do to us. How they make us more careful, more patient, more willing to look again at things we think we already understand. How they connect us to other people who noticed the same things we noticed. How they give us language for things we couldn't name before. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe. It keeps the lights on, and the lights keep the content coming, and the content is made for this community of people who care about stories and what they mean. If you want to see more of this, the subscribe button is the most direct way to tell me that. Drop a comment. Tell me your favorite Gravity Falls mystery. Tell me the one detail that broke your brain on a rewatch. Tell me which part of this you're still thinking about. I read everything. Good night, everyone. Good night from the forest, from the place where the gravity is slightly different and the trees are full of eyes that you mostly don't notice until you've been here long enough to look. Get some sleep, and remember, the answer was always in the credits, right at the beginning, before you knew you were looking for it. Stan is not what he seems, but neither are any of us. Section 19. Every episode's decoded cipher, a deep dive into the hidden running story. The cryptograms at the end of Gravity Falls episodes are not decoration. They are a second show running in parallel with the visible one, accessible only to the people who took the time to learn the decoding systems. Going through them in order is like reading a diary that the show kept for itself, a record of where it was emotionally and narratively at each stage, a collection of hints and reveals and private jokes and genuine foreshadowing that told a story only visible to the fraction of the audience who did the work. In Tourist Trapped, the first episode, the end credit cipher is simple. Decoded through the Caesar 3-back method, it reads, Stan is not what he seems. Before you know anything about the portal, before you know Stan's name is actually Stanley and not Stanford, before you know there is a twin or a 30-year secret, that's what the show chose to tell you first. Not about the gnomes or the journal or the supernatural adventure to come. About Stan. The central mystery was stated in plain sight at the earliest possible moment. In The Legend of the Gobblewonker, the decoded message reads, The water tower is watching. There is a water tower in Gravity Falls with what appears to be a large eye painted on it. This is the kind of detail that slides under your awareness on first viewing and sits there quietly until something brings it back to your attention. Who painted that eye? Why, what is it watching for? The show never addresses this directly. The cipher just mentions it and lets it sit. In Headhunters, the cipher produces, Mabel is the best. This one is a joke, but it's a loving one. Hirsch's affection for the character based on his own sister is visible throughout the show in countless small moments of genuine appreciation for her specific combination of optimism and weirdness. The cipher that makes Mabel the best comes early enough in the series that it reads as a declaration of authorial intent. He made Dipper the protagonist and Mabel the heart. As the season progresses, the messages take different tones. Some are atmospheric. SFVBODBOCFTDBSZ. From the inconveniencing decoded produces, ruins can be scary. Before the Weirdmageddon arc existed in the audience's awareness, the show was thinking about ruins. Some are narrative. Stan Takes the Journals from within Season 1 is a reveal that happened to anyone reading the ciphers carefully before it happened on screen. The Season 2 ciphers, operating under the Visionaire system and requiring keywords hidden within each episode, are substantially more complex. The keywords themselves are often embedded in set dressing. A word visible on the spine of a book in the background, a label on an object, something that requires a secondary level of attention to find. The combination of finding the keyword and then applying it to decode the cipher message creates a two-stage puzzle that mirrors the show's overall approach to its mystery. You need to have done the previous work before the current layer becomes accessible. The sock opera episode Cipher decodes through the keyword socks and produces Bill is watching. During an episode in which Bill is literally inside Dipper's body, looking through his eyes, the end message is a reminder that the surveillance is ongoing. Bill has been present in the show's consciousness long before Weirdmageddon makes him the explicit antagonist. In Northwest Mansion Mystery, the cipher keyword is hidden in the dinosaur skeleton in the History Museum that's briefly visible in the background when the characters are exploring. The message, when decoded, reads, libidus, which is a word connected to desire, and the episode is about Pacifica discovering what she actually wants as opposed to what she's been conditioned to perform. The show hid an emotional summary of its own episode inside a secondary layer of puzzle that required museum-specific observation to access. The Not What He Seems episode, the Season 2 revelation of Stan's true identity, has a cipher that reads, Not What He Seems. The title of the episode is The Message, and the reversed whisper in the opening theme for that episode changes to say, Not What He Seems. The entire apparatus of the show's cryptographic language converges on that single episode to confirm what it started saying in the opening credits of the first episode. The circle closes. The prophecy resolves. The show said it at the beginning, and it said it at the confirmation, and everything in between was the space between the statement and the proof. The final episode of the series, Weirdmageddon 3 Take Back the Falls, decodes its cipher through the Visionaire system to produce Goodbye Gravity Falls. 2 words? The same 2 words that appear in slightly different form after the credits. The show ends twice in 2 different languages, once in the visible story and once in the private one that ran alongside it for 40 episodes. The people who had been doing the decoding work for 4 years got a second farewell, a private one, meant specifically for them. There are also the in-episode reversed audio messages. Various episodes contain audio played backwards in scenes where something significant is happening. A character's voice distorted into apparent noise that, when reversed, produces a coherent message. Bill's interactions are particularly rich in this. During his first fully physical appearance in Dreamscapers, there are moments where his speech, played backwards, contains statements that recontextualize what's happening on screen. The show consistently used audio manipulation as a secondary layer of communication, a technique that dates back to the first season's backwards whisper in the theme music. Mystery numbers beyond our initial count live in the gap between the cipher messages and their context. Some of the decoded messages are still debated in terms of their precise implications. Some keywords were identified only long after the episodes aired, by fans going back through with new information. The complete archive of Gravity Falls cryptography, documented across the wiki and various fan sites, represents years of collective work by thousands of people. The show built a community around the act of finding things, and that community built a knowledge base that has outlasted the show itself. Section 20 on the deeper themes. What Gravity Falls was really about. Every piece of Gravity Falls, if you follow it far enough, arrives at one of a small number of core ideas that the show is genuinely interested in exploring. These aren't imposed from outside. They're visible in the structure of the stories, in the way the show resolves its conflicts and what it chooses to leave unresolved, in the recurring emotional beats that underpin even its most fantastical sequences. The first and most persistent theme is the cost of knowledge. Ford's entire arc is a meditation on what happens when the pursuit of understanding becomes severed from ethical judgment. He wanted to know everything. He was willing to sacrifice relationships, safety, and eventually his own judgment to achieve that knowing. Bill Cipher offered him exactly what he most wanted: answers, validation, the feeling of being the person who finally understood the mechanism behind the mystery. And the price was everything. The journals themselves are an artifact of this theme. The knowledge they contain is valuable, even necessary, but the process of accumulating it destroyed two brilliant minds and sent shockwaves through the lives of everyone connected to them. Dipper is a younger version of the same impulse. He wants to know things. He wants to understand the mystery of Gravity Falls in a way that goes beyond curiosity. It's about identity, about proving himself competent and significant and worthy of being the person who figured it out. His crush on Wendy is partly about wanting to be older than he is, more capable, closer to the version of himself that can handle things. The show gently, consistently pushes back on this. Understanding the mystery is not the same as being ready for the mystery. Knowledge without wisdom is not safety. Dipper learns this gradually, through encounters that keep demonstrating that raw information without emotional groundedness creates problems rather than solving them. The second core theme is about memory and identity. What you remember is what you are, in the show's cosmological framework. The memory device is the most literally expressed version of this, but it runs through everything. Stan's sacrifice is meaningful precisely because it costs him himself, not his body, not his freedom, but the accumulated record of his experience. McGucket becomes who he becomes because of what he systematically removed from himself. The Society of the Blind Eye maintained the town's ordinary life by maintaining the town's ignorance, and the people they treated are, in some meaningful sense, not fully themselves, carrying gaps they don't know are gaps. Bill's fundamental threat is also memory-connected. What Weirdmageddon does to the town, the reality distortions, the transformations, the general unmooring from stable physical reality, is a large-scale version of what the memory gun does to individual people. Bill doesn't want to kill. He wants to transform. He wants to replace coherent experience with chaos, to turn the ordered world into the nightmare realm, where nothing is consistent and nothing can be remembered from one moment to the next because the physical laws that would allow continuity don't exist. The apocalypse he wants is an apocalypse of memory and coherence. The third core theme is about the structure of sacrifice. Almost every significant act of love in the show involves cut. Stan gives up 30 years, Ford loses 30 years, McGucket loses himself. Soos never gets the father he keeps writing letters to. Pacifica's freedom costs her everything her family gave her. Even Dipper's summer ends with the loss of the specific temporary family configuration that made it meaningful. The show does not present love as sufficient to prevent loss. It presents love as the thing that makes loss bearable, that gives the suffering a structure and a direction, that transforms the random damage of circumstances into something that at least means what it was intended to mean. This is genuinely unusual in children's programming, where the convention is usually that love conquers, that the right emotional commitment produces the right outcome. Gravity Falls says, love matters enormously, and sometimes the outcome is still loss, and the love makes the loss meaningful rather than making it not loss. Stan's memory comes back imperfectly. Ford spent 30 years in other dimensions. McGucket spent 30 years as a shadow of himself. These people love each other and bear each other's company and set out on boats together and make do. The show's ending is not triumphant in the way of stories where the good guys win cleanly. It's triumphant in the way that living through something genuinely difficult and arriving at the other side still essentially yourself is a kind of triumph. The fourth core theme is about the difference between appearing and being. The Society of the Blind Eye maintained appearance over reality. The Northwest family performed prosperity and legitimacy over the actual history of violence and fraud that underlay them. Stan performed indifference over his actual desperate love. Bill performed charming eccentricity over his actual nature as a being that destroyed a universe for curiosity. Gideon performed confidence over his actual terror of being ordinary. The show is full of performances and full of moments where the performance slips and something truer becomes visible. What Gravity Falls consistently validates is not the performance but what's underneath it. Stan's love matters more than his con artistry. Pacifica's courage matters more than her trained composure. McGucket's brilliance matters more than his breakdown. Ford's intelligence matters less than his eventual willingness to trust someone he'd hurt. The show keeps arriving at the same place from different directions. What you actually are is more important than what you've convinced people you are, but getting to the actual thing often requires the performance to fail spectacularly first. These themes are not delivered as lectures. They are structural, embedded in plot mechanics and character choices, and the specific ways that conflicts get resolved. Gravity Falls trusts its audience enough to let them arrive at the theme through the story, rather than having a character explain it. This is one of the fundamental reasons the show works so differently at different ages. The theme is more accessible when you have personal experience with its content, and children watching it are absorbing something that will become more legible to them as they accumulate the experiences the show is actually about. Section 21. The real-world geography and the Oregon. That isn't Gravity Falls doesn't exist as a town in Oregon. But Oregon does, and the show's visual and atmospheric relationship to the Pacific Northwest is specific enough that it created a pilgrimage culture. Fans who visit Oregon looking for the show's geography, who hike in forests that have the right quality of pine density and overcast sky, who seek out roadside attractions and unusual small-town museums in the hopes of finding something that resembles what they loved. The closest real-world analogs to the Mystery Shack include the Mystery Spot in Santa Cruz, California, and the Oregon Vortex near Gold Hill, Oregon. Both genuine roadside attractions built around localized phenomena that defy conventional physics expectations, or at least create the appearance of doing so. Alex Hirsch visited these kinds of places during his childhood, and later said that the particular combination of genuine strangeness, amateur scientific enthusiasm, and tourist trap commercialism was exactly the tonal foundation he wanted for Grunkle Stan's operation. Reedsport, Oregon, the small coastal town where the Bill Cipher statue was found, is a real place. It's a fishing community, moderately sized, situated on the Umpqua River near the coast. It has a bicentennial park where the statue temporarily lived after the police moved it from its original forest location. People still make trips to Reedsport to see the statue, now relocated to Confusion Hill in Northern California. And the town itself has absorbed the unexpected piece of pop culture geography that arrived when Hirsch buried a treasure chest in its woods, and tens of thousands of fans followed his map. The show's version of Oregon isn't attempting photorealism. The forests are denser and more atmospheric than most of Oregon's actual wilderness. The skies are more consistently heavy with a specific quality of dramatic overcast. The town is smaller and more tightly contained than any real Oregon community would be. But the feeling is accurate in the way that a memory of a place is accurate. It has the right emotional shape, even when the specific details are altered or compressed. The Pacific Northwest cultural atmosphere, the combination of wilderness proximity and small-town insularity, and the particular low-key friendliness of communities that have always been slightly outside the mainstream, translates into the show in ways that go beyond visual style. Gravity Falls has the personality of a place that has been doing its own thing, independently, without much concern for external validation, for long enough that its eccentricities have become its identity. The town is weird, not because something weird happened to it, but because it has always been weird, and the people who stayed chose to stay in a place that suited them. Section 22. The legacy, the community, and what the show left behind. Gravity Falls ended its broadcast run on February 15, 2016. It had 2 seasons and 40 episodes. It won BAFTA Children's Awards and Annie Awards and was nominated for a Peabody. The physical companion books became New York Times bestsellers. The Cipher hunt became one of the most successful examples of alternate reality game design ever created for a general audience. The Bill Cipher statue still exists and still receives visitors. But the most lasting thing Gravity Falls left behind is the community that formed around the act of finding things in it. The fan spaces that grew up around Gravity Falls, the forums, the wiki, the Reddit communities, the YouTube channels that spent years decoding episodes frame by frame, were built around a shared methodology. The show had trained its audience to look carefully, to be patient, to take notes, to share findings, to approach media as something that rewarded sustained attention rather than passive consumption. This methodology transferred. Fans who learned to analyze Gravity Falls went on to analyze other shows with the same tools. The habits of close reading that the show cultivated became habits of engagement with stories in general. The wiki at Gravity Falls fandom is one of the most comprehensively documented wikis for any animated property. The sheer volume of information documented there, every cipher decoded, every background detail cataloged, every production note from interviews and commentary tracks cross-referenced, represents a collective act of preservation and analysis that will outlast any individual's engagement with the show. It's a monument to collective attention. The show has influenced a generation of animators, writers, and show creators who were children or young adults during its run. Dana Terrace, who created The Owl House, worked as a storyboard artist on Gravity Falls and has credited its approach to mythology building and emotional complexity as foundational to her own creative development. The Owl House itself shows the influence clearly. A show built around a dense mythological architecture, populated with characters whose backgrounds reveal complexity through patient observation, constructed with the expectation that its audience is paying close attention. The Book of Bill, published in 2024, introduced the mythology to a new generation of readers who came to the source material through the book rather than the show. The art book announced for September 2026 will introduce another layer of the story's internal history, the development process, the cut ideas, the choices that shaped what the show became. Hirsch has said he made Gravity Falls as the show he wished had existed when he was growing up. The show that would have given him exactly the kind of respect and complexity he was hungry for at 12 and didn't find in the available media. The evidence that he succeeded is the show's continued relevance over a decade after its conclusion. Gravity Falls is the answer to a question that a child asked himself about what he wished the stories around him were. It grew into the answer that a community of children all over the world would ask themselves for years, each at different moments in their lives, each finding a different layer of what it had to say. The ciphers decoded, the statue was found. The mysteries are mostly solved, and the important questions, the ones about what it means to love someone for 30 years without acknowledgement, about what you owe to the people you hurt, about how much of yourself you can erase before you stop being yourself, those don't resolve. They just get clearer and more complicated and more necessary every time you come back. And now if you're still with me, I hope wherever you are it's warm enough and dark enough and quiet enough to have really settled in. These kinds of videos work best when the world outside has gone a little soft and the forest feels close. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying. Please subscribe if you haven't. And tell me in the comments, what's the Gravity Falls mystery that lives in you? The one that you still think about sometimes? I'd genuinely love to know. Until next time. Sleep well. Section 23. The Creatures of Gravity Falls. The ecosystem that never ended. Before we close this out entirely, there's something we should spend time with that the broader mythology sometimes overshadows. The creatures, the monsters, the entities, the inexplicable things. Gravity Falls as a location doesn't just have a complicated human history and a dimension-hopping antagonist. It has an entire ecosystem of strange, specific beings who have their own lives, their own agendas, their own grudges and attachments. Ford's journals are largely a catalog of these creatures, and the show takes them seriously as inhabitants rather than obstacles. The gnomes, first appearing in Tourist Trapped, are organized in a complex society with a hierarchy and customs and rituals, including the practice of compiling a queen out of the combined effort of a large number of gnomes, because no individual gnome woman is apparently available or willing to do the job. Jeff, the gnome leader, is charismatic in his specific, unhinged way and appears repeatedly throughout the series, always with a fresh grievance. The gnomes are treated throughout as minor inconveniences by the characters, but as a genuine, ongoing society in the background art. They appear foraging in forest scenes, conducting their own business, completely uninterested in the Pines family unless directly provoked. The zombies who rise in Scary Oak are treated with the same specific attention. The Gravity Falls zombies are different from the standard variety. They can only be defeated by singing in perfect three-part harmony, a detail that manages to be both genuinely unusual and thematically perfect for a show where family harmony is one of the operative metaphors. The Gobblewonker is a creature that specifically lives in the lake near Gravity Falls, and has been there long enough for local legend to have formed around it. The episode that introduces it is ostensibly about the creature, but actually about Seuss and the twins choosing to spend time with Stan instead of chasing the monster. The Gobblewonker is real. That detail is confirmed. But the show uses it primarily to establish that the relationships matter more than the discoveries. The mystery is the occasion, not the point. Rumble McSkirmish, the sentient video game character who manifests out of a fighting game cabinet in Fight Fighters, is a creature of pure genre logic. He thinks and speaks entirely in fighting game tropes, and can only understand the world through those conventions. He's also someone whose memories were erased by the Blind Eye Society, which means the society considered a video game character existing in physical reality significant enough to require their standard memory erasure protocol. The Society of the Blind Eye erased the memory of a sentient video game character. The show introduces this detail entirely in passing. The shapeshifter, imprisoned in Ford's underground bunker for decades, and capable of taking the form of anyone Dipper has met, is one of the genuinely terrifying creatures in the show's roster. The extended into the bunker sequence is proper suspenseful horror done in the context of a cartoon. A creature that can be anyone, trapped in a space that creates multiple identical-seeming versions of people you're trying to trust, and the genuine uncertainty about which version is real and which one is hungry. The shapeshifter's comment that six-fingered nerd hasn't been himself in 30 years confirms with chilling casualness that the creature knows exactly what happened with Ford, has been aware of it the entire time it's been locked in the bunker, and has had nothing to do but think about it. The ghosts of the Dusk to Dawn convenience store haunt a building that closed decades ago because of an incident involving teenagers and their rudeness to the couple who owned it. This is deeply human ghost logic. They're not haunting because of trauma. They're haunting because they're annoyed and have nowhere else to be. The show handles the resolution of this haunting with a similar matter-of-factness. The teens apologize, the ghosts are satisfied, everyone moves on. The supernatural and the mundane coexist on the same emotional register. The multi-bear, a creature that is multiple bears sharing one body, accepts death with dignity before revealing that its one wish is to keep listening to Icelandic pop music, which is Dipper's most embarrassing musical preference. The resolution of that episode involves Dipper deciding to admit what he actually likes instead of performing a preference he doesn't have. A bear creature with multiple heads and one body teaches a 12-year-old about authenticity, and the show presents this with complete seriousness. Time Baby, who appears in the credits of the first season finale and has significant involvement in the Blendins Game episode, is an enormous time-traveling infant who governs a future in which time travel is regulated. He is, objectively, one of the stranger figures in the show's cosmology. A baby the size of a building, existing in the year 207,012, with governmental authority over temporal mechanics. His complete seriousness about his own authority, and the show's complete seriousness in treating his authority as legitimate combine to create something that functions both as comedy and as genuine world-building. The entities in Gravity Falls are not random. Each one has a specific logic to it, a specific reason it is exactly the kind of creature it is, rather than some other kind. Hirsch and his writers thought about what each creature's existence says about the world, what it implies about the rules of a universe that contains such a thing, and what encountering it might mean for the people involved. The ecosystem of Gravity Falls has internal consistency. It's not a collection of individual monsters, but a world with a specific set of physical and metaphysical laws that produce specific kinds of beings. Ford's journals were meant to catalog all of them systematically. He started with scientific discipline and eventually found himself writing notes that were less about methodology and more about the emotional experience of understanding that the world was profoundly stranger than any of his academic training had prepared him for. The journals become, by their end, a record of a person being transformed by knowledge, not quite destroyed by it the way McGucket was, but fundamentally altered. The scientist who started the journals is a different person than the one who finished them. The creatures that didn't make it into the show, the ones mentioned in interviews, in the unproduced episode guide, in the Labyrinth parody episode that never existed, and the doll episode and the various ideas that were pitched and rejected, those too belong to the Gravity Falls ecosystem in a ghost form. They exist in the space between what the show was and what it might have been, which is the same space that all creative work leaves behind it. The vast potential of everything that was imagined but not made. The ecosystem of Gravity Falls, the creatures and the society, and the natural laws and the weirdness magnetism that concentrates it all in one small Oregon location. That's the place this show built. And it built it well enough that people have been finding things in it for over a decade, and will keep finding things in it for whatever comes next.